The exit drew ever closer, and fevered thoughts now filled his mind as he scrambled over and through piles of ruined and forgotten sediment, dead skin cast off by the ancient building without remorse. For a moment he felt surrounded, impressed upon by a man of the cloth preaching of sin and ancient evil, while a pitiable and diminished congregation huddled together in fear of what walked nearby. As the footsteps scuffed the dirt and dust-ridden floor, John's clarity of mind returned. And as he began to climb up a large pile of broken wood and stone the door to safety on the other side, his curiosity calmed his nerves momentarily. The dread he felt in his stomach told him to continue onward, out into the open, away from that place, but his need to know was relentless. He had to look. Taking a deep breath, he turned cautiously towards the altar, slowly casting the light from his phone towards the darkened staircase. The air in the hall now grew colder, John's panicked breath visible in the dim light. Darkness seemed to cloud his vision, yet what he could decipher was unmistakable. A tall figure now stood in the doorway, but a deep impression of tortured and perverted humanity emanated from it. Both man and thing exchanged a long and silent stare. Then a croaking string of syllables emerged from the figure's mouth. A language long forgotten, and while its precise definition eluded John's understanding, the contempt which it spoke of did not. The shape in the doorway now moved forward, and as it intimated its sullen movements, John cried out in terror, haphazardly clinging to the rubble, attempting to reach its summit and then make his way to the door. Now he did not care for silence, his clambering movements echoing throughout the hall. Several pieces of stone plunging once more from the roof. As he reached the top of the mound, at the very last moment he peered above only to see a rock as large as a man hurtling towards him. Jumping for his life, he tumbled down the other side of the debris pile. As his body rolled down towards the floor, a searing pain wrenched through his side, slamming against the stone ground. The impact surged into his bones, leaving him dazed momentarily. Staggering to his feet, he looked down only to recoil in horror. A large chunk of wood had impaled itself several inches into his right side. Blood poured from the wound as he almost instinctively pulled at the piece of wood, it grating against his insides before finally being removed. He let out an anguished scream, but as he did so he turned to a noise from behind. The pain in his side was agony, but the sight he beheld was worse than any sensation. The figure in the door was writhing on its belly, dragging itself at an impossible speed over the rubble and towards him. Its body blackened, the bandaged remnants of a white shroud, sliding over the jagged surface with ease. Stumbling in shock, John was paralyzed with fear. Then the realization took him, escape was close. Limping badly towards the door, its slight opening now within grasp, he shoved his body through the gap into the light outside. The door pressed and prodded at the wound in his side, sending strikes of pain piercing through his abdomen. With one last push he screamed, the force of his momentum causing him to fall to the ground outside. Looking up through the gap stared the entombed figure with its face sneering from inside, its arm outstretched, spitting a wild and deafening groan out into the retreating sunshine. John did not take his time to observe the creature. He staggered once more to his feet, his hand now drenched in blood as it clenched the open wound in his side. Moving as quickly from that place as he could, leaving the church grounds behind. He was sure that he could hear voices from deep inside as he fled, the yells and vitriolic protests of long since gone clergy and congregation, mocking, resentful, and despised. In his haste he had lost track of his direction, unfamiliar with the surroundings. In the grip of panic he limped on as fast as he could. But disorientation took him, and before he was aware of how or why, he found himself surrounded by a maze of broken and toppled gravestones. Dizzied and gasping for air, He no longer cared where he was, just as long as he could leave the church and its attendant behind. After catching his breath, he began to negotiate the old cemetery. Some headstones large and looming, while others humble and ruined. Then, as if suffering the effects of an unknown poison, the world began to spin, and as he tried to catch his breath once more, the stones took on an ominous and menacing form, towering above, blocking out the light, staring forcefully down at him. It was not a graveyard which he now stood in, but a ring of warped stones several feet high. They had weathered many storms, ancient and forgotten long before the first brick had been laid of that adulterated church. Feeling compelled to somehow become closer to one of them, he reached out a hand, touching its moss-covered surface. Flashes of a hidden past now filled his mind, as he felt overcome with faintness. His vision clouded and the world began to spin as an abrupt nausea swamped his senses, one which was so intense that it knocked him to his knees, and though he struggled valiantly against its grip, within seconds he crumpled to the ground, the wound in his side heaving and throbbing with each beat of his heart. Lying on his back staring above, the sky seemed to pulse and everything around became distorted as though he were detached from the world, viewing it through a thick and warped lens of glass. The light curved inward unnaturally, and the veil of the world drew back as John gazed into the abyss behind. Awareness left him. He awoke to the silence of the earth. Wisps of broken grass touched his cheek as the wind carried them away to an unknown destination. The sky was black, while no truly living thing stirred. John did not know how long he had been unconscious, but the blanket of stars above left him in no doubt that it had been for at least several hours. The sickness remained, though not as potent. But the wound in his side still wept blood. Rising to his feet, it became clear that his body was still under the effects of whatever was on that hill. In the intoxication of it, the world still possessed a fluid, watery form, but on closing his eyes for a moment he felt that he had somehow become accustomed to it. At least to the point where he could gain his bearing and find a route to escape. Luck was on his side as the moon was present above, albeit only as a partial, waning crescent. This provided him with enough illumination to gauge the strange world and its shapes which surrounded him. He was unsure if he remained where he had fallen, as the ancient standing stones, which he remembered vividly and with no little sense of dread, were nowhere to be seen. But as he stood there with his hand vainly attempting to stem the blood from his side, a frightening realization crept towards him. John found it difficult to convey to me in simple words what that was, but he described it as the rules of nature upturned. Nothing seemed to make sense. For a moment he did not know who he was, why he was there, and what abominable source was causing such illness in him. He seemed to retain the knowledge of the hill and a memory of the church. But his thoughts were turbulent and disconnected. Fleeting moments of identity would quickly be surpassed and replaced by utter confusion. But regardless of the affliction, one constant remained. His instincts pleaded with him to leave that place immediately. But in this fragile state of mind, he could not tell which way would lead him down to the land below, and which route would send him upward, to whoever or whatever sat on the summit. The sensory intoxication was an experience unlike any other the world unraveled. A smell of sickness tinged the air. Whether it was his own vomit or the illness playing tricks, he did not know, but within that stench there was something else. A smell of dampness mixed with the unsettling scent of burnt hair. It became so strong that it began to sting John's eyes, which only furthered his disorientation. Though his eyes were clouded by tears and the world seemed wrong, he now sensed what he could only describe as a presence. The musty smell increased in potency, and as it did, John let out a cough. The response to the noise was distinct, and though he believed that it was impossible to know the mind of someone, something approached, and it did so with malice and hatred as its companions. Terror now turned to fleeting purpose as he quietly wandered past shadowed trees and amongst the wild grass, hoping to find his way out. Staggering as he fumbled his way through the darkness, the pain in his side grew, and thoughts of dying out there on the hill, never to be found by his loved ones, became apparent. For a moment he thought that he would collapse once more. But while the sickness intensified, it was now accompanied by the sound of dead grass and wilted flora being thrust aside, as something trudged through the undergrowth nearby. John's vision was now so poor that he could not tell which way was forward and which back. And in fleeting moments of clarity he felt repulsed by the idea of ending up back at the church or the stones, or graves, unsure of what they had been. He was utterly lost. And something which called that hideous hillside home now approached. Be still, but silence, nor darkness could shield him. No realm of oblivion could provide obscurity. For a wickedness as old as the earth now stalked a man who once laughed in the face of superstition and myth. The air grew denser, and what little light the sliver of moon above provided diminished as though it were being sucked deep into the ground with no escape. Then, nothing. The noise of branches and grass being broken and pushed aside ceased, and in its place a void of sound. Almost unbearable. At the end of his nerves, John could feel any remaining vestige of hope or escape abandon him. It was close, its breath could be felt upon the air, foul, rancid. As of something which long ago lived and yet had not relinquished the desire to cause hurt and pain. Then movement. Dead leaves cracked under its weight. The long grass which had seemed so impenetrable, so dominant, now torn and broken with each shuffling stride. The only thought in John's mind now was to hide. Slowly, his breath stuttered, and quietly gasping, he sank into the long grass, and there he lay, silent, terrified. The presence was closer still. And in the darkness he thought that at times he could see the vague shape of a figure wandering just out of reach. It circled slowly, coming closer, then retreating as if searching the ground meticulously. Then finally, the sound of its cumbersome footsteps grew distant, and then ceased. John breathed a sigh of relief. Then a hand touched his face. Survival now took him, and with a yell of utter terror he rolled onto his side. Searing pain ran through his body, as his own weight and motion thrust an uneven piece of ground deep into his wound. A low groan escaped from whatever monstrosity stood before him, and then, without knowing which way to proceed, John became motivated by a new impetus, jumping to his feet and bolting in a random direction, hoping beyond hope that it would lead out of that madness, that nightmare. Trees and grass flew by in the pitch black of night. A thick miasma of sickness and burnt hair encircled everything, eliciting convulsive retching as he ran. At last he knew where he was. He had his bearing, and it was one which he hoped he would never possess again. The church loomed tall and twisted before him. Something hurtled through the trees behind, and in a moment it would be upon him. At least he knew which direction to go, running as he did to the side, towards the path which he had ascended earlier in the day, a worn track which would lead him to safety. But the land appeared unfamiliar and unnatural. The very shape and construction of his environment seemed to have bent to an unknown and malevolent mind. He had to continue on, to get away from what pursued him. The path must have been in that direction. Then, finally he broke through a line of bushes and trees into a clearing. His heart sank to depths he did not know. There stood the church once more. But it appeared different somehow. By night the building seemed to possess a more sinister and bizarrely altered form from its daytime persona. For a moment John imagined its steeple to be not of rock, stone, or concrete, but of wine and earth and wood, spiraling towards a heaven which had long since spat it out at the world. The rustle of trodden leaves approached once more as he stumbled and gasped for air. The pain from his wound was now almost unbearable, each step forward accompanied by an internal, blinding, tearing sensation. Forced to flee across the face of the church by his stalker, John moved as best he could, staggering and limping, weak and exhausted. Entering a thick network of brambles and thorns. His clothes caught as the barbed appendages of the plants scratched at his face and arms. It was no use, he could not outrun what was coming. Looking over his shoulder, someone was clearly ripping through the branches only a few feet behind. Fear coursed through John's veins as his stalker now bore down on him. Letting out a cry of pain and anguish, the thing amongst the branches seemed to stop for a moment, observing him struggle, his hands cut and grazed by thorns. John pulled and grabbed at the thicket in front, trying to escape, and then to chill his bones once, the figure behind stared, letting out a harrowing groan somewhere between a laugh and a sigh of satisfaction. It began moving at great speed, breaking through the entangled cage of thorns and branches with ease. Closing in quickly, with a scream of pain and disbelief, John finally broke free of the thorns. A brace, but despair haunted him. There the church stood once more, almost mocking, twisted and warped in ways that no human architect could conceive of. Staggering with little fight left, he moved past the church once more as his assailant broke through the tree line. Rushing towards him, John increased his pace as best he could, but by now he could muster little speed. The heavens now opened, and swathes of liquid poured over the church, flowing to the ground beneath, which quickly became sodden and waterlogged. John's strength diminished as he fell to his knees, admitting defeat as a hunted animal relents at the end. Then, salvation. From far away shone a light, one which beamed and broke through the almost impenetrable surrounding thickets. Something to hold on to hope, an anchor to follow, a light from outside that terrible hill. As the sound of his pursuer neared, scrambling across the grass in darkness, one last surge of energy awoke John from his terrible fate. The sight of light and life reignited what small vestige of hope remained. He screamed in agony as he lifted himself to his feet, the rain now lashing down upon him, drenched to the bone, pouring into the hole in his side. But it did not matter. All that mattered was that light, and the safety which it promised. Limping as quickly as he could in its direction, he thrust himself into the vines and branches of the entangled woodland, fear overriding any pain brought about as thorns scratched and cut at his skin. Yet, he was making progress, and the light began to loom larger and larger, vibrant and sustaining. It was clear now that he was heading downhill, and as the momentum of his trajectory caused stumble and fall after fall, it also increased his speed markedly. Flashes of memories not his own once again invaded his mind, thoughts of anger and hatred filled his vision. Images of the church never empty yet absent of the living as the priest reared his hands. So bowed the congregation's heads. Confusion was beginning to seep into him again, and the smell of burnt hair once more filled the world around. Though cumbersome, his stalker could be heard increasing pace, yet it seemed more agitated than it had before. Angered, perhaps even frustrated, John felt sick with panic. The blood now pouring from the wound in his side, unimpeded. Just as the light seemed closest, the promise of redemption, safety, and escape loomed near, he flew down a steep incline of grass, slipping in the wet mud and tumbled at speed to the ground. Pain, exhaustion, and hopelessness ruled supreme as his body, already battered and bruised, came to rest on top of a large fallen tree trunk. The clambering footsteps drew near. And as they did so, John thought to himself that he and that which he laid upon had both been victims of a cruel and hidden evil which called that hillside home. "Come on, son. Get up. Get up," a voice yelled in the darkness, almost drowned out by the now fervent breaking of ground and grass behind. The world seemed warped. But as consciousness now prepared to wither once more from his mind, clarity returned and John realized where he was. His body was slumped not against a fallen tree, but against the wooden gate which marked the boundary of that terrible place. Something was close, that thing which had been hounding him in the dark only a few feet away. "Move! It's nearly upon you!" cried the now familiar voice of Dale. With one last movement, with the final piece of life left in him, John R. opened the gate. Falling face down into a puddle by the roadside, I sat transfixed, the words flowing from John in stuttering fashion, yet with a conviction and reality which I found difficult to ignore. Regardless of my skepticism, this man believed with every fiber of his being that what he had told me was the truth. Dale had apparently went after him, against the wishes of the other villagers. He had long ago lost a son and did not wish for anyone else to succumb to the apparent malevolence of the hillside. The landlord, being an old friend of the farmers, eventually gave in and both men traveled to the foot of the hill in the hopes that John would find their light in the darkness, follow it, and be the first to escape from there in living memory. No matter how much they wished to help though, they would not dare touch that gate, nor cross the hill's threshold. John had to do that on his own, and he did so just as his pursuer leaned over him. I remember letting out a sigh of relief as he finished the last of the wine in front of the fire. There was a moment of silence between us, and I realized that the entire bar was bathed in an anxious reticence. One which was almost tangible, as if those present wanted to speak, but dared not. Finally I spoke, attempting to be as reassuring as possible. "That is an amazing story, John, but it is just a story. I'm sure there is a rational explanation for it all." He bowed his head gravely, staring at the floor. "If it's just a story, then why can't I leave?" he said, looking up at me with an expression half caught in fear, half trapped in desperation. "What do you mean you can't leave? I've been here for 3 months, he shouted. "I sometimes wish Dale had just left me there." "John," I said, leaning over and resting my hand on his shoulder reassuringly, "you can leave whenever you want." But I could see from his expression that he did not believe me. He had been consumed by whatever myths and superstitions the locals had fed him. I concluded that his psyche had been poisoned. Of course I felt that the landlord and others meant well. But I was sure that a conventional explanation would hopefully cure him of his afflicted mind. "I'm going to Glasgow tomorrow," I said cheerfully. "Why not join me? The bus will be here in the afternoon and we can travel back together." "But, of course, I'm forgetting, you have your car with you." Please don't think I was fishing for a lift. I laughed. But John just stared at me grimly, then answered, "My car is sitting out back, wrecked." "Really? I hope it's not too bad." "What happened?" "It took me several days to recover after my experience on the hill," he said mournfully before continuing, "but when I felt up to it I packed my bags, thanked Dale and the landlord, then drove out of the village. A couple of miles into my journey the rain came down in sheets. Visibility was terrible, but I just wanted to leave. I lost control of the car and went straight into a tree. I was survived, but the car is a write-off." "Well, accidents happen. As long as you were ok. How about another drink?" I said, standing up. As I did so, John grabbed my arm forcefully. It was no accident. There was something else on that road. I saw him standing there. A man. I think, at least, it appeared like a man. I swerved to avoid him. And a good thing too. The last thing you would want around here would be to accidentally kill a local. My jokes once more did not appease his frustrations. I sat back down as he conveyed to me his predicament. After the incident with the car, which was towed back to the inn by Dale, John tried everything he could to leave. Each time he attempted to use the local bus, there would be a problem. It would break down. Or there would be a landslide stopping it from entering the village. He even claimed that was why I had been stranded overnight, because he had intended to take the bus again that day. The man was adamant. For 3 months he had been a guest at the Laird of Dungath, and yet no matter how he tried, he could not leave the outskirts of the village. Several times he had even tried to hike to the nearest town, but on each occasion he was beaten back by bitter and perilous weather which appeared without warning. He had even tried to phone for help, but his mobile phone seemed to have no signal, while using a landline resulted in a continuous static. The same applied for anyone who tried to make a call on his behalf. While I could not explain everything that had happened, I was certain that a series of rational and conventional events could account for each. It seemed madness that someone so obviously intelligent and articulate be made to believe such nonsense. I genuinely felt sympathy for the man. "You are the victim of a self-fulfilling prophecy," I said confidently. "What do you mean?" John replied. "I've worked in many villages like this. You come to an old part of the country with a haunting landscape. It seems like another world compared to the modern life of London. Then you are provided with paranoia fuel, a myth that the locals believe about a cursed part of the land. Taking all that in, you have some terrible luck hitting a tree with your car, and before you know it, you believe the whole thing. Perhaps you even imagined the figure on the road. Maybe even the whole encounter. What about the hill?" he asked, obviously intrigued by any possibility that escape could be achieved. "Probably a placebo effect from all the stories you've heard. That or, who knows, maybe you had food poisoning or a virus of some kind and hallucinated the entire thing. Maybe there's even some nut up there living in that church." It was obvious that he remained unconvinced, but I felt that it was my duty to take this poor soul out of that village. Back to Glasgow, where he could hopefully make arrangements to get home. I had seen the damage that unfounded beliefs could cause amongst people and communities before. And I was genuinely appalled by it. I just wanted to help. "Tomorrow, we'll get the bus together and I'll buy you a pint in Glasgow." He never said much in return, other than nodding his head reluctantly in agreement.